Well, hello, and welcome to Philanthropy Matters. I'm Kim Covington. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I acknowledge with respect that the physical locations of the Arizona State University Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions are within the ancestral homelands of those American Indian tribes that have sustained connections to its lands and waters since time immemorial, including the Akamil O'odham Pima, Pipash Maricopa, and Tohono O'odham peoples. I'm pleased to serve as the MC for this special Philanthropy Matters event. My role at the Arizona Community Foundation is Vice President of Community Initiatives, and I also serve as a member of the ASU Lodestar Center's Leadership Council. The council's purpose is to support and advance the mission of the center by nurturing the development, relevance, growth, and sustainability of the enterprise. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Ashcraft, Executive Director of the ASU Lodestar Center for Philanthropy and Nonprofit Innovation and Sorrell Professor of Civic Enterprise. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, Kim. Good morning and welcome, everyone. It's just a pleasure to be with you and to offer some words of welcome. First of all, you know, this is an important day for us in the continuance of what we call our Philanthropy Matters programming. Those of you that have some history with our center know we're deep in what we call the capacity building space for those who lead, those who manage, those who support nonprofits. We and the philanthropic sector, we've learned over a period of time that while the focus on those who lead and manage and do all the amazing work of the sector is absolutely central to our mission, but at times is actually insufficient to understand how we advance in this capacity building space without deeply exploring the role of philanthropy. So we have a body of work called Philanthropy Matters. And we're just delighted, particularly as we are in and out and coming through the world of the pandemic, that we can continue to use technology in such a way to scale and reach many people. That's one silver lining of this time in which we live. And such is the case today as we continue with our Philanthropy Matters programming. This speaker series is a part of an ongoing rollout in 2022 and beyond. And I want at this time to acknowledge our center's senior fellow for philanthropy in the person of Jackie Alling. Many of you on this webinar know Jackie well from her long history in the philanthropic sector space and particularly in leadership roles at the Arizona Community Foundation. We're just delighted that Jackie's leadership, along with other people and other collaborators, have made possible the continued build out of this important programming. Jackie will be a part of this webinar, and a big shout out to Kim for being our facilitator. Jackie will also assist and be on the lookout for questions, other things that may be posed in the chat room and so on. So it is very likely that you'll hear from Jackie as she weaves in some of that effort in supporting Kim in the work. Certainly want to acknowledge Lucy Bernholz. It's been my pleasure to be in her company 2 or 3 times and just always amazed in awe of her thought leadership, a provocateur, a significant leader in our field. So we're just delighted that Lucy is here as Senior Research Scholar at Stanford University's Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, where she directs the Digital Civil Society Lab. Lastly, just want to give a big shout out to the Arizona Community Foundation, a longtime collaborator and partner with our ASU Lodestar Center. And many of you know ACF quite well. So Kim, I'm going to hand back to you. And Kim, in addition to today's role, thanks for being a member of our center's Leadership Council.
It is my pleasure. Thank you. It's my pleasure, Robert. Thank you so much for your leadership. So today we have our featured speaker, Lucy Bernholz, who will discuss her recent book, How We Give Now, a philanthropic guide for the rest of us. In her book, Lucy shows that philanthropy is more than writing a check and claiming a tax deduction. For most of us, the non-wealthy givers like me, philanthropy can be a way of living our values and participating in society. In her book, Lucy highlights the wide range of the givingscape, from volunteerism, donating our personalized, digitized data, to point-of-sale contributions at the cash register. We will also have a local panel representing some Arizona collaborative philanthropic models from the Arizona Asian Pacific American Women's Giving Circle at ACF, Social Venture Partners Phoenix, and the StartupAZ Foundation. Can't wait for you to hear from our panelists. We will start with Lucy's remarks, and then the audience can ask questions. Feel free to use the Q&A section to drop in your questions or comments. As Robert mentioned, Jackie is going to help me monitor those questions and comments. And then later in the program, we'll have a chance to learn more about those philanthropic activity efforts in Arizona. But first, please welcome Lucy. Hi.
Hi, Kim. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody at ASU and at the Lodestar Center. It's really a delight to be with you here today. Let me just get started here. I wanted to jump right in and I tell you a little bit about the book and a little bit about what we're working on here. But first, let me pay my respects to the Muwekma Ohlone people, who are the traditional stewards of the land on which Stanford University is based. And I pay my respects to their leaders, past, present, and future. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how we give now. And this is a book that was written in, the research was finished in 2019. The book came out last year. And as Kim mentioned in that lovely introduction, I use a term called the givingscape, but I want to back up from that and actually invite all of you to join me in some of the same kinds of processes and procedures that we use to actually write the book. Because what I was interested in putting this book together and doing this research was actually understanding how everyday people, not the very wealthy, not the people who make the headlines, not the people who are writing massive checks with many zeros, but the rest of us, from our great diversity of traditions and backgrounds and ethnicities, nationalities, languages, abilities, how do we give now? What are we doing through all of this? And so before I start talking about what I learned from the book, I'm going to actually ask all of you who are here on the call to join in and answer some of these questions. So we're going to use a little polling feature, which the ASU team will pull up here, and you can participate, speaking for yourself in this moment. Let me start with the first question. Do you ever purchase, or have you ever purchased, charity branded products like a red iPhone or a certain kind of battery that might have a pink breast cancer label on it or something? If ever in your life you have ever done this, just pick yes. If you've never done it, pick no. If you don't remember if you've done it, pick I don't know. So that's the first question, because the we in the book is all of us. It's not some other magical, mystical group of people. It's all of us. So I'm not quite sure how if the poll works all as one big thing. So that's the first question. Put your answer in using through the chat feature, I think, is where the poll shows up. Another question. Do you shop at farmers markets with an eye toward helping the local food economy? Are you doing that in a way thinking about its effect on the local farmers or the local food system in Arizona or in the greater Phoenix area, or wherever you're calling in from? Third question, do you bank at a community credit union? Think about, if you do, think about why you might have made that decision. Some people make that decision for very deliberate reasons. Another question, do you help your neighbors on a regular basis with chores or driving? Do you help an elderly neighbor or someone who might need regular lifts to the doctor's office or pick up groceries for folks? And since we've all been through or going through a pandemic together, this may be something you did more of or are doing more of now than you did in the past. Fifth question, how about politics? Do you give money to political candidates or for political issues? Or maybe you give your time, but do you give money to political candidates or for political issues? And then the final question, have you ever donated your data for a cause? And here I mean deliberately, not just your usual interactions with social media companies or your email provider, anything like that. None of the sort of stuff we hear about in the Facebook papers. But have you done this deliberately, thoughtfully, thought about how your data of some sort might make a difference? So those are the 6 questions. If I understand the way Zoom polling works, you should be able to fill those, pick your answer, and we should be able to see some results. Let's see if we can get some results. Let's see how that'll pop up. Is that just going to pop up for us somewhere? I might need to take my, oh, there we go. So here's some answers. So a lot of people, about 57, more than half of you have purchased the charity branded products. Quite a few of you, wow, farmers markets are popular, wonderful. 80% thinking about the local food systems. Just over half don't bank at a community credit union, but there's quite a few, 40% are. Lots of people helping out on a regular basis with their neighbors. Money to politics, yep, more than half of you. And donated data. Here's a, oh my goodness, look at this. 41% said yes, I'd love to hear from you during the Q&A and during the conversation. No, 43%. And then a very honest, I don't know how this stuff works. I don't know if I've done it or not. Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking that time. But I wanted to put those up there because when we wrote the book, let me tell you a little bit about the book. As I mentioned, I was interested in how people like my circle of friends and other people I know in sort of this non-rich category, but everyday people, if you will, give. And what do they think they're doing when they're doing it? If you get out of the kind of professional foundation nonprofit world and you talk to people in church basements, in bars, in libraries, in community centers, we talk to young people at rec centers, we talk to a lot of people in their homes. They gathered their extended kin and talked to them in their homes and asked people, how do you give to make the world a better place? And the pictures you see here are some an artist's renditions of the very people you'll meet in the book. There's about 40 individuals profiled in the book of various parts of the country. I had a wonderful team of Stanford undergraduates speaking Spanish, Mandarin, and English, who traveled around the country the summer of 2019 and held these small workshops and asking people these questions and then giving them time to reflect on what it is they did. So the whole process is documented. I'm happy to share that with people. But it was one of the few times, one of the things we heard from folks was it was one of the few times in their life that they ever got asked about how they give without actually being asked to give, which I thought was really quite remarkable. And because we were talking about how, not how much, and not to whom, and not why, but how, people felt very free to share their experiences. And they offered up a wide variety of activities that they viewed as giving, that met their definition of giving to make the world a better place. So I want to just show you a little bit of research. This is the cumulative result of asking hundreds of people this question in a setting in which they could be in conversation with each other about how they give now. And if those of you who are on the call who are involved in formal philanthropy and in the nonprofit sector won't be at all surprised by the top 2 lines here, monetary donation and volunteering time. Those are the 2 things that the United States is actually pretty good at tracking. We pay a lot, much more so than in other places, and for much longer, we have collected data on how people make monetary donations and volunteering time. But all of these other behaviors, sharing kindness, their purchasing choices, the career choices young people make, and even older people like myself, mentoring, kinship care, advocacy, all of those things are sort of left out of the data that are collected by the US philanthropic and nonprofit sector. I also want to say 2 other things about this slide before I move on. One is these data were collected in the summer of 2019. The analysis and the book writing happened in the fall of 2019 and in through the first part of 2020, and the book was published in 2021. So if you think about this, we captured data before the pandemic was widely experienced in the United States. And if you look at all of those bars on this bar chart below the top two, from sharing kindness on down to advocacy, you start to see a set of behaviors that one might say would predict something that the media spent a lot of time covering through 2020 and into 2021, which is a phenomenon called mutual aid, where people are actually gathering with like-minded people or people in their community. They're all on an equal basis. Everyone contributes and everyone can take. It is literally a system of mutual support. And it was not at all anticipated. I did not anticipate the pandemic, but I find this in retrospect to be remarkably predictive of the kinds of behaviors that the media picked up on and wrote a lot about in terms of how we were supporting ourselves and taking care of each other, especially through 2020 and the first phase of what we now know will be a long-standing pandemic. And I found that kind of remarkable and affirming for why I was doing the research. But the other thing I want to make sure you don't misread is that very top line, because it just says monetary donation. It does not say writing a check to a 501c3 nonprofit. That's in there, but so are a whole lot of other behaviors that we didn't break out in this chart, but really a lot of the book is about understanding what's going on in there. So some of the other things that are in that chart are things like giving a dollar or a few dollars directly to someone, or giving money to what in the US tax code is considered political activity, not charitable activity. And we talk, I know there are people here from community foundations, a lot of you with a lot of deep tax experience and very sophisticated understanding of how charitable giving works. What I want to tell you, that top line bar chart of this picture says, and what the book spends a lot of time thinking about, is that tax code division was almost meaningless to the people we spoke to. They gave money, but they were not carefully deciding, is it charitable, is it political, is it direct? None of that mattered. Is it a crowdfunding ask? All of that is clustered into people's understanding of giving. And that's extraordinarily important for all of us. In fact, using this data, and I'll show you what the Urban Institute has done some similar consideration of this. You may have seen this infographic on the left, where in 2018, the Urban Institute tried to put some data, put some numbers or percentages behind things like point of sale giving or crowdfunding or political giving or remittance giving. And they're continuing to track this. And I highly recommend people pay a lot of attention to the new work that the Urban Institute is doing called the Giving Dashboard, where they're breaking that top line out about giving money and breaking it out into all the many, many different kinds of activities that our neighbors and even us, as you just showed in your answers to the poll, are undertaking when we say we're giving money. And so what we start to see as we look closer and closer into these behaviors is that there are a lot of assumptions that have shaped the philanthropic and nonprofit sector that for everyday people of regular means, and we were careful in who we talked to about their sort of sense of themselves and their own capacity to give. These are not wealthy individuals. They do an awful lot of things that we just don't count as giving in the charitable sector. The other thing I often say about this octopus looking constellation graphic from the Urban Institute on the left there is it is in fact the world's worst infographic. Now the Urban Institute has heard me say that, so I'm not saying anything out of school, but it's the world's worst infographic for those who are teaching students how to collect and represent data, because you'll see that some of them are percentages and some of them are hard numbers. And if you dig in and read the text that you probably can't read, it's not even all from the same year, but that tells us something important. It tells us that we don't have the kind of good, strong, reliable data on all these other behaviors that we do on writing checks to 501c3 nonprofits, yet this is what people are doing. They're doing all of these things, and they think of all of this as giving. And so it's this collection of behaviors, and it's the collection of products that intermediate these behaviors that I call the givingscape. Let me just take a second to be clearer about that. So people give money using checkbooks, cash, crowdfunding, donor advised funds, community foundations. They might give cash directly to someone. They might do this point of sale where you round up your check. I think it was more than half of you have said you've purchased charity branded products. All of those transactions are the products on the givingscape that I illuminate from these data in, I believe it's chapter 2 of the book. And the real givingscaping we'll get to this in the conversation. Our advised fund is a product. Making a gift on a crowdfunding platform is the using a product. Buying a t-shirt is a purchasing a product. These are all products that facilitate the movement of money from an individual to, theoretically at least, theoretically it's being moved to a good organization or a good cause. Thinking about them as products is critical. We've been told to think about them as democratizing activities. And I want to challenge that on its face. There's nothing democratizing about this. This is about commodification. These are different kinds of vendors selling different kinds of products that you and I and others like us can use to intermediate our giving. Taken as a whole, it's a product landscape that I call the givingscape. And it includes a number of things that a lot of people don't think of as products, but I'm trying to get people to see that we should view these different activities as different product choices, and then we can make better decisions about which ones are right for us. And if we leave aside the rhetoric of democratizing, we can actually take more informed action as to whether or not making a crowdfund gift or getting involved, putting some of my money in an impact investing fund, or choosing to put my savings account at a community credit union, which one of those, or perhaps all of them, make sense for what I'm trying to accomplish. So that's the givingscape, which we're going to talk about. And it's this mix of ways to move money. So, and they're not mutually exclusive. By no means, they are not mutually exclusive. And for anyone on the phone who is a fundraiser, that's important, because we tend to think of our organizations as being, you know, perhaps if we're in competition for a donation, we're in competition only with other nonprofits like us. But if you flip this around and realize this is a representation of the givers we're talking to, they are not seeing us as only in competition with another nonprofit. They're looking at this entire product landscape. Some of them very deliberately, some of them a little more happenstance, but some of them very deliberately. So that was what all that research led to, was that there's really a much more interesting, dynamic, exciting picture going on of how people give when we look at the broader diversity of people ages about 16 to 84, all genders, all abilities, a wide variety of religions, a wide variety of racial backgrounds, a wide variety of linguistic preference. You see a much more dynamic picture than just the kind of I give money to a nonprofit behavior that we've tended to privilege as philanthropy. I'm going to highlight one very important one, and then I'm going to move on to the thing that's truly new. So here's one really important one. Most of you who are on the call who work in the nonprofit sector or work in philanthropy and think about giving have probably, and you can call me out on this if I'm putting you in a box that you don't fit in, have probably been taught or learned or think that people's charitable giving is separate from their political giving, that those are two different behaviors, that is what economists call complementary behaviors. And what that means is I care about homelessness. I'm as likely to make a gift to a homelessness nonprofit, as I might be to support a political candidate who has a platform that addresses these issues. That understanding that people give to both and the behaviors don't influence each other is based on old research that primarily looked at wealthy white men. Now, if you look at wealthy white men today, or wealthy individuals of any background today, they're not like the rest of us. They got more money. And so it's very likely that they can give to both the nonprofit and to the political organization. That makes sense. It will be complementary behavior for them. But if you ask me, and perhaps all of you on the phone, if I give $1 or $100, or in the case of this slide, which is data from the 2020 election, looking at gifts of $200 or less to the two major candidates for president in 2020, these are gifts of under $200, you'll see, first of all, a large number of people are doing this. A huge number, a growing percentage of people are getting involved in small giving political giving. But if you're like me, if I've given that $200 to a politician, I don't have another $200. I've given it away. So to carry into our understanding of the vast number of Americans, this assumption that political giving and charitable giving is complementary is misplaced. I think what we need to understand is that for people with an unlimited income, not unlimited wealth, these actions are substitutes. And there is a relationship between political giving and charitable giving that we just don't understand. And here I mean we, the research community, of which I'm part, and also you, the practitioner community, who some of you, and this may happen in some of the groups we're going to talk to later, those two actions, politics and charity, they don't matter the way we think they do. They do both sometimes. Their giving to one affects their giving to others. And we need to do a much more nuanced job of understanding just this one set of relationships from the giving scape. I'd argue we need to understand all of the dynamics between them much better than we do. And I hope that my book is a start to that, that we see, oh my gosh, here's the whole menu of options, and I probably missed some. But we can't assume people are just have an unlimited wallet. I don't have a bottomless wallet or bottomless time, and I can't do all of them. I'm making choices between them. And that has implications for how we think. And I want to say to those of you, again, those of you who are kind of tax experts or raised on the value of the tax deduction and all of that, we talked to hundreds of people about this. We collected thousands of Post-it notes about what they did. No one, not a single person, mentioned the tax code unless my team brought it up. That is not a factor for the people we talk to. Now, maybe it's a factor for many, but it's not a factor for the folks we talk to. And if you look at some of the other data, which I'm happy to share with you, you'll see that it's a relevant factor for a relatively small group of people. That's important for a couple of reasons. Happy to talk about it later. But I wanted to just bring up this one example of how when you look at the broader diversity of people in this country who are giving to make the world a better place, they're choosing from a much more robust and dynamic set of products. They're making choices based on criteria that I don't fully understand because I didn't ask people why, I asked people how. And I think there's a lot we can begin to ask really new and exciting questions to help us all understand what we're doing. So that's the thing I wanted to sort of, since I only have a few minutes, just pull out that one little bit from the book. But I also want to introduce something that's actually new, that we weren't doing 30 years ago. I'm an historian, and when, you know, history is a story of change over time. So a lot of the book is about how these behaviors that have existed for a long time are changing a little bit. They're in relationship to each other in ways that we haven't always understood, but there is actually something that's new, and that is our ability to give data, to make a deliberate choice Just like we make a deliberate choice about how we give our money or how we give our time, how we give our data. So let me start with a quick story. This is Kat Chang. She appears in the book. She's a native Hawaiian. She was raised on the islands in an extended family where she learned the indigenous understanding of the flora and fauna of Hawaii. The birds, their understanding of how things act. And then she moved to California to go to college. And there she studied botany, and she learned really the whole Western scientific taxonomy for the same plants that she'd learned the indigenous understanding of. But she also became very interested in mushrooms, very interested in soil. She actually works as a landscape architect, and I can talk for hours about mushrooms, but I won't. But she got very interested in mushrooms, and she used to go hiking and carry this big heavy pile of books that you see on the right-hand side. Anybody who is a hiker, especially in Arizona, knows that's not a pile of books you want to carry in your backpack. So Kat was thrilled when she learned about an app that she could put on her phone. The app is called iNaturalist, and I wish I could see you all because I'd ask you to raise your hands if you've ever used it. But let me tell you a little bit about iNaturalist. It's just one example. It's a whole lot of things like this, but iNaturalist is an app. You download it, you put it on your phone. Next time you're out on a hike or even a walk, you can do this in the city, and you see a bug or a tree or a bird or something, and you don't know what it is. You can snap a photo of that thing, bug, bird, tree, upload it through the iNaturalist app, and within about 30 seconds, you'll get an answer as to what it is. That's really cool. You like bugs, birds, and trees, right? You can really understand the world around you. What you're actually doing, and iNaturalist explains this to people when you actually use the app, is you're contributing your photograph to the world's largest database of ground level photography of the way our flora and fauna and wildlife are changing due to climate change. They are building, and you can see this is a picture of all the contributions at a certain date and time that were made around the world at 83 million observations. Those are submitted photographs that are compiled into this database with your permission. And then scientists can use this database to say, wow, look, the bluebird population in downtown Phoenix is drastically dropped over the last 5 years. What's going on? Now, I made that up. I don't know what's happening to bluebirds in Phoenix. But it's a very community-driven process. I can talk a lot about iNaturalist, but I want you to just think about that single action. You take a photo, you upload it to this app, you get an answer to your question, and you have donated meaningful data to scientific research that's both improving our understanding of climate change, but also improving our understanding of different types of animals and birds and things. There've been hundreds and hundreds of scientific papers produced from this research. Now, I want you to think about one thing in doing that. And here, I really wish I could see you all, but I want you to think about what happens when you share a photograph from your phone. And Kim, since I can see you, I'm going to ask you directly. Have you ever shared a photo that you took, regardless of whether it's a bird or anything, just taken a photo on your phone and shared it with your mom? Yeah, you've done that, right? Who has the photo when you do that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I just thought it was just the one person I sent it to.
Right. Well, you did. Your mom has it, right?
Yeah, my mom has it, or someone on social media.
Right. But what about you? Do you still have it?
I still have it.
You still have it. Aha. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Think about that for a second. Kim, since you're here, have you ever given somebody $1 and still had it after you gave them?
No.
You can't. It doesn't work that way.
No.
But you can give a photograph and still have it. This is one of the many things about digitized data that make it a whole different thing than giving them $1 or giving an hour. I'm sure you've done a lot of volunteer time, right? You give that hour and you don't get it back. You give that $1, you don't have it anymore. You give that photograph and you still have it.
Wow, I never thought of it like that.
Economics lecture on how that works and all the other parts of this. But for everybody on the call, that alone should be reason to realize that when it comes to donating our digital data, we're going to need a whole new set of rules, because the rules that we have are for giving away things that you actually give away. But when it comes to digital data, you still have it. So there's one example of that. Let me talk also about the fact that some of you answered very honestly, have I ever given my data, and said, I don't know. Most of us, most people, besides me, I'm one of the weirdos who actually reads the terms and conditions. And, you know, I run something called the Digital Civil Society Lab, so I kind of have to understand all this stuff. But most of us do a lot of things on the internet without really stopping to think about how it works, because it just works, right? That's actually part of how they get us to use it. We skim through the long consent agreement and click I agree, and we're done with it. But if you want to actually have an honest interaction with somebody where you're asking them to donate their data, you want to explain to them what they're doing. I'm going to assume good intentions here. So this slide is from a consent screen for a medical research study on Parkinson's disease. It's actually about 10 years old now, when Apple first introduced into its operating system something called Research Kit, which allows researchers, medical researchers, to set up studies that you can opt into. You can download their app and opt in that says, we're going to collect some data for you to help us understand Parkinson's. Now, what they wanted to make clear to that person, they did not want to have a consent process that was 12 pages of 9-point font that no one would read, and they'd click agree and they'd move on. That's not the relationship the Arizona Community Foundation has with its donors. And that's not the relationship that the medical community wanted to have with these donors. So this screen shows you the kinds of activities you actually had to do on your phone. You had to do things with your fingers. You had to shake your phone. You had to make the phone generate the data that the scientists wanted in order to express your consent to participate. Why do I bring this up? Because not only do we need new rules, we, the philanthropic community, all of you who are experts on working with donors and building community and building real meaningful relationships with people, need to get involved in setting the rules for how we ask people to give us their data, because you're experts on it. You've been doing it for 100 years. You've been working in donor relationships to build meaningful relationships with people. This is a new resource. We need new ways of doing that. Let me say a couple other examples, and then I'm going to stop talking. Why are people doing this, and why does Lucy get so worked up about this? Because this is the future, this is the present and the future of our nonprofit sector. This screen is an example from Consumer Reports, which I bet you're all familiar with, National Consumer Advocacy Organization, leading a data-raising campaign. They weren't asking people for money. They were actually asked, and this is still happening, they're actually asking people for their cable bill, the data on their cable bill. Because, as you probably know, I'm sure there are large swaths of rural Arizona where internet access doesn't exist. And the only people, the only entities that really know where internet access works and how fast it's being delivered and how much people are paying for it are the cable companies. The rest of us, we don't know. We know what they tell us on ads, but you don't believe them. So Consumer Reports is effectively asking people to donate their cable bill with certain information included and certain information removed, so they can build a mirror database of what the cable companies have, so they can check to see, is it really that fast? Does it really cost that much? Is it really available? And I've got thousands of examples of this. So nonprofits, just like the ones in Arizona, and probably some of you on the phone, who are not asking people for money, they're asking people for data. So we in the nonprofit sector, we in the philanthropic community have an opportunity and an obligation to help make sure that these practices are just and equitable and fair, and they're done with integrity. Because if we don't, this is what happens. This slide is meant to prompt you to go look at the news from earlier in 2022, about a nonprofit called Crisis Text Line, which for the last decade has been working to help suicide prevention lines around the country and around the world switch from being phone-based to being text-based. Because if any of you have ever seen a teenager, you've never seen her do this. She doesn't even know it does this. She only knows it does this. And kids in crisis need text-based ways to interact with crisis prevention counselors. And for years, Crisis Text Line, I held Crisis Text Line. I served on their advisory board until about 5 years ago when I didn't agree with something we were doing and I stepped off. But they have a lot of money, an enormous amount of data expertise, and an extraordinarily important problem they were working on. And they managed to really blow it, terribly blow it, on how they were using the data from those text messages. They did so badly, they caused such harm that in February of this year, I believe it was, I may be getting the date wrong, January of this year, the Federal Trade Commission shut them down. They shut it down. Now, how many of you nonprofits out there even think the Federal Trade Commission has any business regulating charities? What on earth is going on here? I can talk about this story at length. There were a number of really terrible decisions. There's a whole lot of stuff on the internet you can find about this. But my point here is, here's an organization that was set up with the knowledgeable people, good intentions, significant resources, and when it came to managing the data that they collected with integrity, they blew it. They blew it so badly, the effort was shut down. And if they've got all those resources and you're the Arizona Community Foundation or another nonprofit in Phoenix that doesn't even know what I'm talking about, can't imagine this is happening, it's like, oh my goodness, we need to understand what our responsibility is for the data that we collect. And before we go out launching anything like what Consumer Reports has launched, we better get smart about this. Because otherwise, in the name of doing good, you're doing actual verifiable harm. And that is not okay. So understanding how we give data as people and how nonprofits and foundations are going to help manage and take care of that is the present responsibility of the sector. Here are a few examples of how whole new organizational structures are being set up to do this. So the other reason this matters to you in Phoenix is that among you right now, I can almost guarantee there are organizations in your midst, most likely actually, and most assuredly among the Native communities in Arizona, who are setting up whole new ways of dealing with requests for data and ways to use it. So just as the not-for-profit organization was invented to manage the donation of time and money for the production of kind of shared goods, we're seeing new kinds of organizations created to manage the donation of data for some kind of common good. And if you want to be on the front edge of understanding the shape of the nonprofit sector and the shape of philanthropy, these are the kinds of organizations you're going to want to understand. So really, as fast as I could go, overview of the book, we give in a lot of different ways. We give the familiar resources of time and money in ways that we really need to do a better job of understanding. And oh my goodness, we have this whole new resource that could have incredible power to help us make progress against a lot of our shared challenges. But we, the sector, need to engage in helping figure out if and when and how and from whom data donations are going to happen, and how we're going to make sure that they're done with integrity, that they're done in a fair and just way, and that issues of equity and power are at the very center of our thinking about it. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. This is so relevant and timely to the work that we're doing in Arizona and across the country, Lucy. Everyone is collecting data right now, especially to determine equity in grant making. And at the Arizona Community Foundation, we don't want to do harm to BIPOC-led organizations, but we need to know how equitable we are. So what is the best way to collect this data without doing harm and to get an accurate reflection of our inequities?
Yeah. So you're talking about, I assume, Kim, you're talking about demographic data about the people you're working with.
Yes.
Here's my only shorthand answer to that question without knowing a lot more about what you're doing. The people who are in the data should be at the table making decisions about the data.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that different communities, whether they be the people with disabilities, Native communities, Black communities, elderly, those people in that data set are capable and have opinions about how you're going to use it. And you want them to be helping you set up those rules. You don't want to start collecting any data until you've had meaningful conversations where they have had not just input, but decision-making authority on what data you're going to collect, who you're going to share it with, when you're going to destroy it, how you're going to use it, how you're going to store it. They're the data. Data are people. The data you're talking about, just think of it as people.
Yeah.
So listen to them. Now, there are lots of, there's a lot of information from the Urban Institute has put out some good information about collecting demographically granular data. There's a lot of data practices that might require some advanced expertise and even possibly maybe some advanced technology. But I want to tell you that this is about people. Your data are about people, and people have the right to tell you yes or no and to come up with how you're doing this. And then your organization, since you bravely volunteered the Community Foundation, has an obligation, I would argue, to do what they say.
Yeah.
And if you're going to collect data, say on demographic information, make sure you're doing it in a way that they believe that the community tells you is actually meaningful. So they're telling you the categories that matter. You can do it in ways that they can then use it for their advocacy. You could help them collect data. Maybe you don't even collect it. Maybe they collect it. And you work from what they collect. But it's about it is a power question. It's about repositioning that power, recognizing that demographic data is data about people. And you want the people to be part of that conversation, a leading part of that conversation. And it's entirely possible. Another very common thing is that funders ask nonprofits to ask very granular questions about who they serve, but then the funders don't help the nonprofits protect that information in any way. Not okay.
Okay.
Right? So you can look through all of those processes. There's a lot of good resources. We have information. There's a website. I'll drop it in the chat, digitalimpact.io. Free information that we've built at Stanford and that we've collected from partners around the world about how to govern data responsibly in the nonprofit sector. There's also the Responsible Data Forum. These are all free because nonprofits don't have enough money. But funders have a huge responsibility here, which is not to set their partners up collecting data that they then can't protect.
Yeah.
Don't collect it if you can't protect it, and put the people at the center of the conversation.
Don't
Fascinating, Lucy.
Yes,
we do
thank
have,
you.
I'm sorry, Kim, we do have a question. I think it's sort of a follow-up to what you had referenced, Lucy, in terms of when you're asking for data, have meaningful conversations with the folks that you're collecting the data about. So they sort of asked about the mechanisms. What would you recommend? Surveys, focus group, phone calls, text, or some other model? Any recommendations about that?
I mean, it's hard to know without having more specific detail, but I would say, I want to reiterate, I'm not talking about like asking people if it's okay. I'm talking about meaningfully engaging with the community of concern. First of all, finding out if they're collecting it and how they're doing it. And then do you also have to collect it? If they're collecting data for their own purposes about their community, do you also have to put them through some rigmarole of collecting data? Or do you have enough of a trusted relationship where you can find out what you need to know from what they're already doing? No reason to put extra burdens on nonprofits. We all know that, right? I'm also not talking about just consulting with people. Data have a life cycle that actually goes for generations, right? If you collect data on me and my community, and I and my people my age cohort say, yeah, it's okay, that data are also going to tell you things about our kids and our grandkids. And I'm not even touching DNA data yet. You know, that's a whole nother thing. So there's a lifespan to data. So this isn't a one-off. This is actually an opportunity to really put into practice the rhetoric we like to use about being community engaged. I'd say this is about being community led. Now, for decades, and I'm not familiar with the communities in Arizona, but for decades around the world, I can tell you that indigenous communities, and this has had to do with data pre-digital, they know the long experience of having data extracted from them for academic research for the most part. Black communities as well, right? They're used to being the subject of people's inquiry, not the actor in that inquiry. And there's many types of what are called data sovereignty agreements built by, written by, and practiced by indigenous communities. If you have meaningful relationships with indigenous leaders, I would try to connect with them to see if they are willing to help you understand what is behind those sovereignty agreements, what is behind that whole set of practices, not to ask them to give it to you, but to see what you can learn about the respectful understanding of what data about a community actually means. And then build from there so that you'd actually be creating, and probably by supporting them and doing this themselves, their data practices. Now I pull out the indigenous communities because I know across the Americas, across Australia, across South Africa and other colonized places, this is 50, 60 years old of communities saying, we own the data, we use it, we'll tell you what you can do with it and what you can't. And I think that's actually a very powerful example from which to start.
And we're getting comments.
This complicated.
Yeah, we're getting comments saying yes in the chat. Thank you. Then we asked the audience to make sure you're utilizing the Q&A section to provide any other comments or questions for Lucy. Thank you so much. And we have Barbara Poli in the room here. Barbara is a leader with Hopi Tribe and works with the Hopi Endowment Fund. We appreciate you being here. And she said, great words, Lucy. It makes me think about collecting data for very rural areas like native reservations. During the pandemic, they really had many local people step forward to help our people with that. So that is very relevant. Lucy, you've written 4 books in philanthropy, on philanthropy, about philanthropy. Why this book now?
There are a lot of books written for wealthy people, about wealthy people, and about philanthropy. So much so, and I work at a research center that produces some of that stuff, and it's all valuable. I don't want to claim it's not valuable, but I think it's misleading. It's misleading. It wasn't answering my questions. I was like, okay, now I know, what someone thinks about how Bill Gates should give away his money. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the people around, the people who live and make San Francisco, where I live, really work. And I couldn't find that information. Now, writing a book takes a long time. This book started a long time ago. It was published in 2021, but it started a long time ago. And I want to actually provoke you a little bit in answer to this question. It wasn't just that I was, every author will say, I wrote it because I had a question and I wanted to answer, blah, blah, blah. I think that our collective attention on philanthropy as being about wealthy people is dangerous. It disempowers individuals. It says what you're doing doesn't count. And that's garbage. I just think that's garbage. and even more so, I want to go back to that tax point I made earlier, which for people in the nonprofit sector and philanthropy who are so attuned to this that we think it's just, you know, handed down on Sinai. We write the tax laws. The most recent data I've seen on the percentage of Americans who take charitable tax exemptions for their giving, less than 10% of the population. But if you go to independent sector, you go to the Council on Foundations, you go to the advocacy organizations, their entire policy agenda is about tax law. No one we spoke to cared about the taxes. We're writing a policy agenda. We're doubling down on a policy agenda that doesn't mean anything to most of the people I care about. That has two costs. It means we're, you know, pounding away on something that only benefits a wealthy few. And two, we've narrowed our imagination so we can't even think about things that might help people participate. If giving is a way of participating, you know what would help more people participate? Universal child care and affordable broadband.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that on the agenda at a conference about philanthropy? No, it's the tax code. So
Yeah.
we're doing ourselves a disservice. One final thing to really hopefully poke somebody so they'll come back at me on this. The more we equate philanthropy with just what the wealthy do, the more we see media coverage and conversations with people like Mr. Musk, where he's asked, or, you know, stories are written about whether he should pay taxes or whether he can do it philanthropically. I don't know about you, but nobody's ever asked me that question.
No.
Nobody asks me if I'd rather be philanthropic or pay tax. No, and the fact that most of us, like, I had this moment where I suddenly realized that is a bananas conversation. What are we doing?
What are we doing?
What are we doing? And look at the state of this country. Look at the income inequality. Look at the tax. I mean, we've gone way too far toward being an industry in service to a very particular slice of the people. And I think we have a much greater opportunity and responsibility to be much more inclusive and think about what it means to give to make the world a better place. And how do we help more of us do that?
And I'm looking at the data that you provided about monetary donations, volunteerism, purchasing choices. And I saw at the bottom, promoting philanthropy only got 3% and advocacy 3%. So we can do our part, right?
Exactly.
In telling those stories.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be Elon. We can all tell our stories about philanthropy. I really appreciate this snapshot of your book, Lucy. We're going to get more questions and comments in the Q&A section as our program continues. We really appreciate all of your work, especially looking at who gives now. We will now go to the next segment of our program, which will highlight the philanthropic work of our local panelists. And we are also going to invite Lucy back in that discussion. We will kick off this program, this part of the program, with a brief video highlighting the Arizona Community Foundation's Philanthropy for All giving circles and initiatives. And if you need to take a break, now is the time to do it, but please don't go far. Listen and watch this video. It's pretty emotional, pretty impactful, and really shows a brief snapshot of Arizona's philanthropic landscape. Don't go away.
I used to write things when I went to Asia We're the Arizona Community Foundation, and community is in our middle name. And our Philanthropy for All groups really help connect us to the communities in such meaningful ways. They understand the needs and aspirations of our communities in ways that we may not. So it's really important for us at ACF to have that connectivity to make sure that we're investing in the right ways.
Philanthropy for all means that anybody, no matter your age or your occupation, can give, and you can build a legacy and pass to the next generation.
To make sure that every part of our community, whether it be African American, Latina, Native American, Asian American, LGBTQ, feel empowered to participate in philanthropy and make a difference in our communities.
So your wife is doing okay, I hear?
Yeah, she is.
The initiative was thought up as I sat on the Arizona Community Foundation board and looked around at my own communities, Native communities around the state of Arizona. And I was wondering how we could bring together more Native people to learn how to do philanthropy better. I've got enough people around to pick me up if I fall over.
There are 22 tribes in Arizona, and some of those representatives are from Hopi, from Tewa, from Laguna, from Thanatham, from San Carlos Apache to Wallapai. And so it's such a great way to work with indigenous people from throughout this region.
The Kellenberger-Tolleson Center for LGBTQ Philanthropy is an effort of the Community Foundation to raise money from and for the LGBTQ community here in Arizona, but also to serve as a role model of similar centers around the country.
Especially in rural Arizona, a lot of LGBTQ people don't have that community connectedness. Even though we know there are LGBTQ people in every community, they may not have a youth center or a recreation center or community center that brings LGBTQ people together. But we know that there are folks there that need support, and I think one of the things that I love about the KNT Center for LGBTQ Philanthropy, it provides that support for Arizonans that are LGBTQ to find that connection, receive the support they need, and then just live healthy, happy lives here in our great state of Arizona. Everybody deserves that.
It is a group of 25 or more like-minded women who want to make a difference in the community, who want to share. Philanthropy isn't new to the Latino community. We're philanthropists from the heart. We give to our neighbors, we give to our family, we do umpteen things for our children. You know, it's a lot about giving, and it's giving from the heart.
What it means to me now, too, is that I get to be with other Latina sisters who have the same kind of joy in participating in the community and being part of something that's bigger than any of us. So that brings me incredible joy.
For us, it's a legacy that transforms the life of African American women and girls. The goal is sustainability, which means that African American women and girls can live their highest and best quality of life now and in the future.
We are givers, but that's been kept in our community. People just see us as takers, but we are just givers and givers. I think it has to change our thinking about what our giving is and what that means. We are philanthropists. We take in our sisters' kids, we take in our grandkids, we take in all those things, but we need to take that next step and say, I gave this because I wanted to help this person. And not for the credit, not for it to be seen, for somebody to say, look how much I gave and look what I did, but to let people know that I gave and you can give too.
BPI supports equity and giving to the Black community in areas such as STEM, education, health, and social justice.
Congratulations to Gap Academy.
African Americans have always had a history of giving. And BPI is transforming the way we give in our community. We're leveraging technology, we're amplifying our social justice footprint, and we're really looking at how we can support change makers.
I am so proud and utterly amazed that in just a few short years we've been able to establish not only a thriving Black philanthropy initiative, but we have really engaged others to join our Philanthropy for All initiatives.
Anyone, any and everyone can be a philanthropist.
Philanthropy shows up for different people in different ways.
Some people need more than others, and some need less. And that's what we need to be aware of. Philanthropy for all just means we listen to one another.
For all.
For all.
That was good.
For all. Yes.
For all.
All.
For all.
For all.
For all.
And welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that snapshot of Philanthropy for All. We cut it down just a little bit to just give you a glimpse of some of the collaborative giving in Arizona, but there are countless collaborative giving groups across Arizona. So let's welcome back Lucy and our other incredible philanthropists who will explain why they have joined a collaborative giving movement. First, after a successful corporate career as a technology leader in the life sciences industry, he took the leap of faith in 2006 to launch 360 Vantage, an industry cloud technology company. He served as CEO and bootstrapped the business from startup to strategic exit, joining forces with IMS Health, now IQVIA. Today, he's focused on supporting his portfolio, investing in high growth opportunities, and helping startups grow and give back through the StartupAZ Foundation. Please welcome entrepreneur, investor, and co-founder of StartupAZ, Mario Martinez II.
Hello, pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Now, she is the Chief Legal Officer of Fox Restaurant Concepts, LLC, a national restaurant group based in Phoenix, Arizona. She was for many years a partner in the national law firm of Quarles and Brady, LLP, where she helped clients with their most strategic business transactions. She also completed 4 years of public service as a White House appointee to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security during the Obama administration, and as general counsel to Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano. She is married to Gary Restaino, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. She currently serves as the vice chair of the Arizona Community Foundation and the chair of its audit committee, and as a member of the Arizona Asian Pacific American Women's Giving Circle at ACF. Please welcome Leezie Kim.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Thank you, Kim.
He is most passionate about bringing the best out of individuals and entities. His love languages are strategy, storytelling, and social impact. As head of strategy for evolvedMD, at the forefront of healthcare innovation with the scope of work that includes strategy, corporate development, growth, branding, culture, and coaching. Prior to evolvedMD, he worked with some of the nation's most prominent and curious CEOs and entrepreneurs, advising on philanthropy, policy, and everything social good as regional director of ALDR, formerly Gen Next. He is a member of the Black Philanthropy Initiative at ACF and board member of Social Venture Partners Phoenix. Please welcome Sentari Minor.
Hello, everyone. Excited for this conversation. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, panelists. Well, I shared a little bit about the panelists, but let's get to know them a little bit more and understand their lived experience. And maybe a fun fact about yourselves. Let's start with Mario.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Northeast and moved to Arizona in 2003 by way of a company that recruited me out to the market. Spent a few years with them and then took that leap of faith to go ahead and start a company in 2006 and led that to a successful exit in 2013. But all along the way had recognized some of the constraints and challenges of building a company here in Arizona, which in turn led us to looking at how do we solve those issues for the long haul in this market? And so in 2014, I actually transitioned out of my operating role, connected with a bunch of entrepreneurs in this market, and we came together to then go forward and launch StartupAZ to build a platform to help companies grow and give back. So that's the essence of it, kind of the origin story of how it came to be. The first phase of things, and so to speak, the first product that we launched is now known as the Collective, where we try to identify the top 10 companies, top 20 companies in market, invite them into this program, which is an annual long process, and then nurture them over the following 12 months through monthly check-ins that they do. But we also host a retreat in Flagstaff, Arizona every summer to kick off that process with them. So that's been a very rewarding key component to what's going on as it relates to pulling the companies together. But there's certainly other elements that we'll come to as we talk here. So
any fun facts? Thank you, Mario. Any fun facts about you?
Sure, a couple of fun facts, I guess. I'm a huge fan of motorsports, so I enjoy racing. But the most recent and exciting news is I am being promoted in life and going to be a grandpa this August.
Wow, congratulations. Congratulations. I watch Formula One. Do you watch Formula One racing?
Indeed, yes.
Yes. Okay, so we have something in common. Thank you, Mario. Okay, Leezie, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit more about your lived experiences and fun?
Sure, Kim, I'm happy to. So as Kim mentioned, I'm the vice chair of the Arizona Community Foundation, something I'm very proud of, and a member of the Asian American Women's Giving Circle at ACF. I am a lawyer, but the most fun thing about me is that, and most telling is that even though I grew up here in Phoenix, which was quite a long time ago, I'm actually an immigrant to this country. I was born in Seoul, Korea, came here as a child along with my family. And so I see the world, through that learned experience. The one thing, though, that I haven't actually ever even told you, Kim, is that of the things that I am proud of, you mentioned my time at Homeland Security. One of the things I'm so proud of is that I'm not sure a lot of people know that it was what they called the Arizona Mafia. It was a group of Arizonans who were at Homeland Security in the Obama administration. We were the ones who as a group created the DACA program, the program that has allowed so many even of my own employees here at this company to work here and thrive here in the United States. These are people who were brought here as children. And it took us 2 years to get that program through all the various hoops within the Obama administration. And I see it every day. I see it in the engineers at SRP who tell me about their experiences being in that program. I see it here at my own company. And it's one of the most, it is probably one of the best things I will have ever done.
Wow, so it started right there and you called yourselves the Mafia. I love it.
They called us the Arizona Mafia, a bunch of Arizonans who were at Homeland Security.
I love it. Thank you so much for that service. That has been so enriching for our community and has done so much to improve our economy as well. Thank you, Leezie. Sentari, tell us a little bit about yourself. Any lived experiences or fun facts that we don't know about you?
Okay, so similar to Leezie, I grew up here in Phoenix, went to high school right downtown. I would say that my career has mostly been rooted in nonprofit and social impact. So started actually at the Rodell Foundation and then did major gifts fundraising for a large nonprofit here, and then actually went on to the staff of Social Venture Partners Arizona. So always in the philanthropy space. And then I took a career turn to really work with prominent CEOs, purposeful CEOs, and helping them figure out how to be more engaged philanthropically and politically. And then about 2 years ago, came over to evolvedMD. And, I was very excited about this opportunity because we reimagine behavioral health, and I've always been very, very candid about my mental health journey. And so it's very important for me, and I'm very passionate about making sure that we reduce stigma, but also for men, and then especially Black men, to talk about what's happening in mental health. So that's the work I get to do every day. Fun fact about me. Is I was a college cheerleader.
Oh my goodness, we have something else in common.
I knew that one, actually.
I love that. Okay, I'll share my pom-poms if you share yours. Okay. That's fun. That's fun. Okay, we're going to have to do a cheer a little bit later in the program. Thank you all so very much for sharing a little bit about your history, your lived experience, and a fun fact. And we appreciate all the service that you've contributed to Arizona and across the country. Well, each of you represents a type of collaborative philanthropy. You explained a little bit about it in this giving scape that Lucy mentioned. Well, you have a question, Lucy, about that. Lucy, why don't you chime in and ask the first question?
Thanks, Kim, and it's so nice to meet you, the three of you. I'm really curious. I wish we'd had our How We Give Now conversations in Phoenix, but what is it about the groups that you are most active in that you think is unique or truly different? And what are the focus areas of the different collaborative philanthropy groups you each just mentioned? I don't know who wants to go first. We could stick with the order that Kim started. Maybe start with Mario.
Sure. So, the exciting part is we had, identified multiple issues in the market, right? So it's hard to attract capital and talent to help grow companies. But to me, the core ingredient is the quality of the companies that we're presenting to the market. Hence why we started with the collective and building that muscle of developing high quality companies, which in turn will turn into magnets, for solving some of those other issues downstream. Today, we are now approaching our 7th cohort, which will be going live on June 9th in Flagstaff, which is fantastic, and have now touched over 90 companies. But one of the key elements, I think, that makes our model unique is we also have a pledge 1% component tied to it. It's not a requirement, but it is encouraged that the founders of the companies pledge 1% to the foundation or to a nonprofit of some sort into the future, that they can make a difference in the communities that they're operating in, or the communities or cause that they care most about. Ideally, with the foundation being a key supporter to their success and growth over time, we view kind of the evergreen model and nature of the structure to be, substantial impact for generations to come.
It's fabulous, yeah. And giving from those startup companies and that workplace as a place of engagement is definitely something that we see and can be nurtured. That's really quite exciting. Leezie, what about you?
Well, I'm part of the Asian American Women's Giving Circle, and that is philanthropy on a small scale with the other groups. These are all communities that are very, very highly charitable in their church, in their communities, with their neighbors. But maybe they haven't had the experience with grant making and formal fundraising. So this is a group of about 15, 20 women who chip in, a certain amount per year, a couple thousand per year. And we set our goals and our intentions for our donations for that year. Then we solicit proposals. And we decide, how we go through the proposals. We actually have presentations. We make some decisions and become grant makers. What's been really interesting is that many of our donations are to very small grassroots organizations, because these are not large amounts. These are $15,000, $20,000 grants. But it has really, it has really taught some of these small organizations how to write proposals, how to present proposals, how to actually write the after action report to the grant makers. So it's been a very, very good learning opportunity for the grantors as well as the grantees.
Yeah, that's wonderful. One of the things I've seen in giving circles that are built around a specific identity group, and maybe this is true for you, is that the relationships between the donors and the recipients is really quite powerful and grows over time, and people kind of cross over from one to the other over time as well.
That is absolutely true. And let me just remark, there's at least, I was thinking of last year's donations. It's very timely. You know, two of the larger grants we made last year was, one was to an organization that was addressing, you know, the violence against Asian Americans by doing widespread bystander training. And that was fantastic to see. And the other was a group of Asian American nurses in this community who were doing both COVID vaccination as well as general health screening in various languages on Saturday mornings at Asian American grocery stores.
Yeah.
And so I have learned, if you want to get anything done, you should rely on nurses. They are incredible. They're incredible organizers. They are incredible at getting things done.
That's great. Sentari, how about your experience?
Yeah, and again, I'm coming to this conversation wearing two hats. So I'll start with the one for the Black Philanthropy Initiative. And so very similar to everything that Leezie shared, a group of passionate Black philanthropists that get together, pool our money, and then grant that out into the community. I think one of the things that we've done most recently that's been really impactful is got kind of having concerted and focused effort on Black ownership and entrepreneurship. So when you think about the best ways to close the Black wealth gap, which is still the same after 50 years, where white Americans still own 10 times more wealth than Black Americans, we've been really thoughtful and intentional about how do we deploy money into the community to make sure that Black-owned businesses are supported and that they're thriving. And so for us, the big piece there is not only giving to these small nonprofits in the Black community that are doing great work, which we will still continue to do, but also be very intentional and focused on raising Black entrepreneurs. And then the second piece is I'm also wearing the Social Venture Partners of Arizona hat. And I always reflect on SVP because it's been such a big part of my career and how I give for at least over a decade. I've been part of SVP for probably about 15 years now in some capacity. And, SVP takes a venture capital approach to philanthropy. So bringing together philanthropists, donors, pulling their time, talent, and treasure into nonprofits and social impact organizations. And I think what's so unique is that in addition to the grants, which are great, what our investees, so the nonprofits we work with, are very thankful for is the time and talent. So really taking the talent of folks around the room and building capacity within the organization. So going beyond just grant making and saying, like, what can we do to help you elevate, build capacity, and serve your clients even more?
Thank you, Sentari, and thank you, Lucy, for asking that question, and Mario and Leezie. Let's talk a little bit more about the structure of your groups, and understand, who participates. How do you join the group, and why did you join the group? So let's start with Sentari. Can you explain a little bit more about Social Venture Partners, its structure, and BPI, and why did you join?
Absolutely. So from the Social Venture Partner standpoint, partners join at a certain level given the size of your household. So if you're over, I believe it's over 45, you pay a certain amount, and then under 45, a certain amount, and then you just give those dollars, and those are pooled. So anyone can be a partner, a member. If you want to learn more, just ask me and I'll tell you how. And then those dollars are granted into the community. We are actually a collaborative fund of the Arizona Community Foundation. So we're housed in the ACF. There's an advisory board that's a part of it. And there's about, I believe, 120 members here locally that give, again, the time, talent, and treasure. And then for BPI, it's one of those things where I joined BPI about the same time I also joined another giving circle, the Black Men's Giving Circle. I did both at the same time. And it was probably about 5 years ago when I realized that I, growing up in Phoenix, didn't really see people of color who emulated like success and professionalism. And then you come to these two groups and it's a bunch of people that are powerful, committed, successful, all in a group. And so that's what really drew me to those two groups. But with BPI, it's been more so seeing Blacks come together and really elevate the community. There are folks, it's such a diverse group of individuals. You have physicians, you have entrepreneurs, you have corporate folks, you have teachers, like everyone can join and everyone can be a part of it. And what I love about BPI is that, and all of us has touched on this, is like, I'm not wealthy, but it gives me an entry point into making a big impact. And that was something that I was very, very interested in.
I love that too, Sentari, and it really gives all of us a pathway of giving. It opens up the door, so to speak, to philanthropy, even though we've always given. As Lucy mentioned, many of us give at church. And then Leezie mentioned, this helps all of us understand, the structure of giving, the strategy of giving. So we now have members of the Black Philanthropy Initiative and the Giving Circle starting their own family endowments, thanks to being a part of that collaborative. So thank you, Sentari. Leezie, why did you join the Asian Women's Giving Circle?
Well, I think just like Sentari, because someone asked, it grows. It's a very organic process. And there is, Sentari, I totally understand. I grew up out here, and there were some of us out here back then, 40, 50 years ago, but they weren't a lot. So I know what you mean. We were kind of absent. And so it is such an enriching experience to be amongst, these other women who have all of these different interesting backgrounds. We're not even actually all Asian American, as I think about it, I'd say a third of us aren't, but we are all longtime Arizonans. And so that experience of seeing what we're able to do and commit to this community is just fantastic. Our challenge, it's been interesting, I've been thinking about this, our challenge is something that I probably should talk to Sentari about, is the next generation, is creating the legacy, because we are aging out, as it were. And so we probably need to be rejuvenating our membership.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We can talk a little bit more about that. And Mario, in your case, yours is a little different. So what do you know about how your partners or members give across the giving space or giving scape? You mentioned the founders give 1%. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I guess just to clarify in terms of our structure, so we came out of the gates and established a board of directors immediately. And then we have a founding CEO that was in place, and we have just recently hired a new CEO to take over the reins and continue the mission of the organization. So we had succession modeling kind of built into the structure and thinking about this from a long haul perspective. So many of the board members or contributors are either entrepreneurs or supporters of the ecosystem. And separate from the individuals that are contributing to the organization with capital or time, there's also institutions that we partnered with in Arizona that have been very helpful along the way, including the ACF, and Jackie's one of our board members. So we definitely appreciate everything that she's done and her support over the years. But in addition to, we have the collective, which is the group of companies and the cohorts that we've gone through, which we're inspiring with this generosity and performance flywheel that we've developed, which we're seeing them come back now, right? So either cutting checks themselves into the foundation or also giving with their time, right? And also attracting other members to the organization. We do have an EIR program where if entrepreneurs in residence, so people who have been there, done it, want to get engaged, they can plug into the organization that way. And then, obviously, like I mentioned, the institutions that we're working with, such as APS, who has been a great partner to contribute and provide some early capital to get this thing going, along with some seed funders.
Thank you, Mario. Lucy, you want to take the next question?
Sure. One of the things that I've seen so powerfully in collaborative giving, like you're all describing, is the way in which it becomes more than just about giving. It really becomes about leadership and these network building. So I appreciate hearing your comments about that. What are you most proud of, each of you? I mean, you've mentioned some of this, but also none of this is ever as easy as it sounds on one of these calls. So if there have been challenges that you faced, Leezie mentioned bringing in younger people, but that you're working on where you might be able to brainstorm together about that, that would be great to hear about.
I'm happy to kick it off if you'd like.
Thanks,
Mario. No worries. I would say the thing that I'm most proud of in terms of this overall effort over the last 7 years here, when you look at the macro situation that we face in the recent years of pandemic, you have the economy challenges that we're facing today. My view is one of the most noble things you can do is create jobs, right? And I think that's where entrepreneurs and startups come into play, and we do what we can to support them and help hopefully unlock significant growth where they're able to create significant jobs and really make an impact in the communities they're operating in. So that's the essence of a lot of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we're proud of that, and we've now touched over 90 companies, I think, at this stage, with this most recent cohort being added, which translates into well over 1,000 jobs that have been created in the recent years, and I'm sure those numbers are going to grow exponentially now in the next couple of years as well.
That's really great. That's amazing. Leezie?
That's, I guess, the thing that I am most proud of is that we got to see very quickly how a small group of determined people on the funding side and on the operational side are able to take advantage of every crisis and respond very quickly. My time at Homeland Security was doing national counterterrorism as well as response. So, you see one thing that you will, one thing that I learned about America, about all of us in our DNA, we are incredibly responsive when it comes to any kind of crisis. It is something that is not necessarily part of the DNA of other countries, some shared, but even when you talk to people from other countries, and because there are some crises that are international, like the pandemic that we're dealing with now, Americans are extraordinary in that we are very, very quick to say, how can I help? Put me in, coach. What can I do? And it's not just for ourselves. Now, I will say sometimes that gets in the way of an organized response, but it is our absolute American quality. You ask people from other countries and they say, we are so generous and we are so quick to help. And that is something, you see even on this small scale. And sometimes it's good to be reminded, even on a small scale, about how good we are at responding to real crises and needs, particularly in our own backyard.
Yeah, that's great. It's great. It's so exciting to hear that you're experiencing that yourself. That you can sort of point to it, you hear about it, but we each get to be part of that. Sentari?
Yeah, from from the SVP standpoint, it's been around for about 20 years in Arizona. We were actually the first followers out of a movement out of Seattle, and here we've been able to give more than $5 million to 130 nonprofits, which is great kind of dollar impact. But I think what we can be most proud of is we were at the forefront of how people talk about giving and how people talk about philanthropy. It's Social Venture Partners makes it so accessible. And what I love is that our partners really do kind of roll up their sleeves and get involved with the nonprofits. And so it's a great philanthropic education. I've heard time and time again from partners about how being part of SVP made them rethink how they're giving in their family, in their company. And that's been really powerful just from a philanthropic education and philanthropy landscape piece. On the BPI standpoint, again, more close to $1 million given to the Black community locally. But I think going back to what I said before, what I think we can be most proud of is how we flipped representation and portrayal of Blacks in Arizona. So when you, and Kim does a really good job of kind of galvanizing everyone for pictures and everything, but when you see this group of Black men in suits in a picture, or a group of people talking, that's very, very powerful in a way that I don't think people really understand. And it really shows people, especially the next generation, like, oh, I look like that, I can be that. And BPI has been a wonderful way to kind of portray that and make that possible.
Can I just build on that for a second, Kim? Excuse me for interrupting. I mean, one of the things that I, as a white person who's been in sort of formal philanthropy for 30 years, thinks is really important. And I think it's SVP is a good example of it starting to happen, but the Black Philanthropy Initiative, the identity-based philanthropy, giving circles, is that it's also changing white philanthropy. And that can't happen fast enough. And I think changing, in my opinion, and changing again, this sort of what the word means. Some of the most exciting conversations I had when I was writing the book were I spent several months with folks at the Latino Community Foundation in California, which has giving circles across the state. And they're really directly trying to change the meaning of the word. And not just, change the face, but literally change the meaning of the world, because there's traditions of giving and care that have been structurally excluded by the way we've written the rules about what is philanthropy and what counts. And it privileges white Eurocentric corporate structure, and it leaves out the global majority of practices. And to begin that shift and to begin that change, I think is just as powerful as helping what the tax code incentivizes to be comfortable to a wider range of people. So I just wanted to put that onto the table.
I'm so glad you pointed that out, Lucy. We have the Native American Initiative as well as, and those donors are saying, you're leaving out the way we give is more reciprocal, and it is the human capital, as Mario pointed out, that is so valuable to our tribal communities. So we really must count that in the data as well, as you mentioned earlier, Lucy. Now talk about what you guys explain, what you're proud of about the work that your group has done in the community. Share a little bit more about that, but any surprises along the way that we can learn from? And then as Leezie mentioned, what are your hopes and dreams for the next generation? So let's start with Mario on that one.
In terms of surprises, I think early on, right? So StartupAZ itself was a startup, right? And as we're introducing it to the community, it was, people weren't sure, whether or not it was going to work or stick. And, there was a lot of hesitation, which I don't think we were anticipating to be the case. So we had to build, trust over time by executing and putting points on the board and showing the value that we were creating, where now I think it's a much different conversation, and it's naturally attracting a lot of high caliber folks to come get engaged. So I think that's just part of it, is just heads down and execute and prove value. And I think the side effect will be the positive side, on the other end. So and I think in terms of final thoughts on my end, just kind of thinking about I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, Kim. But, I think my whole philosophy personally over time, throughout the course of my career, building a company, being a leader in that company, and having the opportunity to influence a lot of people. And I think post the company itself and being able to do it at a community level is do what we can with what we have, right? Mm-hmm. And let that grow and evolve over time, right? And do things that hopefully will have an exponential effect over time. So I think that's what we're doing here as well. And thinking in a lot of ways, having fun with it and working with a lot of great people to hopefully have long-term meaningful impact.
Thank you, Mario. What about you, Sentari? What challenges have you seen with social venture partners and BPI? Any surprises along the way?
Yeah, I can talk about challenges and surprises. Challenges for both organizations. For SVP, this is everyone, but specifically SVP during COVID, the S in SVP is for social. And so not having a way for everyone to physically convene and be with each other, which is such a big part of the model and how we give, that was very, very challenging. And luckily we've been able to get ahead of it and come out stronger. And on the BPI piece, I think it's, as I talked about earlier, the Black wealth gap, for us to be able to be truly transformative in this work, we as Black philanthropists can't do it alone. And so I think the challenge is, how do we bring in enough dollars, probably not even from our community, but from allies like folks on this screen, to really fund, empower some impact? I would say those are the two challenges. And the surprise is, well, not really surprises, but more so affirmations and like reaffirming some things would be the power of intention and focus. So, and I say that from two different lenses. On the BPI standpoint, looking at the Black wealth gap and saying, all right, for us to actually get ahead of this, we can't be scattershot with our giving. We actually have to be super focused and laser aligned on how to do that. And with that has become such great things that come out of that focus. And then on the SVP front, what I'm very, very proud of is that the CEO, Amy Armstrong, has done a really good job of saying, we're actually going to focus on making sure that our partnership looks more like Phoenix, and actually focus on bringing in partners of color, which is very, very, it's easier to do, it's harder to do in practice, and we're working through it, but having that focus and seeing partners that look like me come through the door and onboarded and come through emails has been really, really powerful. So showing that, not really a surprise, but once you actually focus on something and be intentional and really put a framework around it, then those results will actually come.
Thank you, Sentari. And that takes time, doesn't it? It takes more time working with working on building equity and engaging the entire community. That's really important work. Thank you, Sentari. What about you, Leezie? What are your hopes and about what could come next?
Well, I just see so much potential growth. One of the great challenges of being part of an organization that is as broad-based as the term Asian American is that, we're talking about, 10 to 12 different communities who all identify as Asian American. That creates, challenges in cultural and language barriers and things that we have to address, especially in the service element. But it is probably one of the great strengths as well. I mean, it has been a real experience and a real joy, I think, for the members of the Giving Circle to attend a health screening clinic where there are nurses who are Filipino nurses, Vietnamese nurses, Korean nurses, people speaking Mandarin. This is a way to reach people, typically immigrants and elderly, in the language that they are most comfortable with. And to see that happen and that it can happen just reminds you that we all have a lot more in common than we have, differences, and that it can be done, and it's extraordinary. And that, again, you want something done, you should go to nurses.
That's right. Thank you, Leezie. We would love to hear from our audience. So continue to put your questions or comments in the chat. Lucy, feel free to ask our panelists any questions, but here's one from Barbara Poley, who asks, what is the best start to help change the shift in a white philanthropy? We talked about the impact on white philanthropy earlier, and changing the shift in how that particular group thinks about giving to the community as a whole. And I think maybe this is maybe to start with Lucy.
What a great question. And thank you for it. There's a lot of work to do. I think one of the tough things here is, and I thought a lot about this when I called the book How We Give Now, is to help to raise up the power of the kinds of giving that are traditional within different communities, right alongside this white corporatized structure, and literally kind of count it as part of the same set of activities, so that the centering of the white formalized structures doesn't continue to be sort of like, here's our table and maybe we'll invite you into it. That whole process is not what I'm talking about. It's not about DEI initiatives and taking the white structure and sort of, sprinkling it with practices and traditions that are powerful in their own right. And so I think the attention and voice and getting white philanthropy to turn its head and leave its building and say, this set of practices is philanthropy in and of itself. This is part of it. And there's this structure and there's these structures, and they're both valuable and they both matter and they can work together. And that white philanthropy actually has to, if you will, to use an oft-used phrase, get invited to the table of practices and traditions in Native communities or in the Black community or in various Asian American communities, so that they're seen as that they're equal, and that the white community is in the learning role. They're not in the power role. They're not in the setting the table role. They're the, can I get myself invited role? And is there actually anything of value that I bring to this role? And that is a real shift in perception. But I see it happening. I see it happening. I tried to show some examples in the book. I see it happening, for example, in the extraordinary work that's happening up in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, in the NDN Collective. I see it happening with giving circles that are partnering with community foundations and sort of being, maybe incubated in that, but then have those relationships to say, look, we've gotten what we need from you. Now you need to learn from us. And this needs to be seen, that what we're doing is just as powerful. I think, again, there's the word philanthropy itself is really complicated because it's not a word that most people use. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, giving in the Black community, for example. When I look at How We Give Now, this book I wrote, I think all of these things that I put different chapters to, for as far as I know, to the best of my understanding, Black communities have been doing all of those things for their entire time here on this continent.
That's right.
None of it is new to them. It's that they all count, that they all matter. And I think that's where we need to say then, okay, this is a country of all of these traditions. How do we need, are there privileges and structural rules and regulations and tax codes that are saying only this thing counts? That's not okay. That has to change. There are policy implications to this, huge policy implications to this. I'd like to think, and here nobody's ever called me a Pollyanna, but here's where I'm a little bit hopeful, is that because we now, I believe, collectively, we have to figure out if and how to use data as a philanthropic resource, that the way that is an opportunity to write the rules again. And for Black communities and Indigenous communities and queer communities and people with disabilities who have been most harmed by our current digital ecosystem, the opportunity to center that expertise in writing these new rules is a real chance to say, we're going to create conversations and think about regulations and rules and norms and codes led by communities that have thought long and hard about what it means to be harmed by digital data and systems of oppression, and set the new rules from that place. Not absolutely, positively, 100% not from the companies that collect all of this data from us. Then the book goes into why that is actually a disaster, and it's happening in front of us. And so there's an opportunity to really create new rules for this new resource. And then I'm hopeful that our existing white structures would adapt, then they would be in the follower position, if you will. I'm eager to make any of that happen, but that's not all right. I'll stop. I'm getting all excited here.
Well, we need you to help make that happen and advocate for that. So those with the most experience about what's happening in their community should hold the most power, not those who have the most money.
Exactly.
Like Elon Musk.
Right. Well, because we all are rich in data.
Yeah.
I mean, we generate a lot of it. And so it's a slightly different dynamic, I hope.
Yes. Any final words from the other panelists, Leezie, Sentari, Mario, any final words from you? We have about 5 minutes left. Great conversation.
Wants to go for it? I'll go. I think the conversation was too short. I could have done this all day. Thanks everyone for this. I think reflecting on Lucy, just this idea of trust-based philanthropy actually does have me hopeful for the future. So putting philanthropy and the ideas of how to best strengthen communities within those communities and then having resources follow. I think more and more folks are understanding that concept, and that makes me very hopeful. And then the last thing would be just from the perch that I have in my day job, be really intentional and thoughtful about your mental health. So everyone on this, just take some time for you today because it's so extremely important in the work that we do.
Thank you, Sentari. Leezie.
What good advice, Sentari. Thank you so much for that. And Lucy, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everyone who participated. You know, Lucy, I was just thinking as you were talking about digital data, you know, this is such a, I think people here in this community have such a visceral reaction to what you were saying because we live in Arizona, which has a very checkered history about how we have used used genetic and medical data of our own Native American tribes, as Barbara well knows. And so, you know, maybe we're getting to the point where we've all realized that that is a problem. This digital data, which is, you know, I think people think of as not as private as medical data, at least at this point in our community's development, that is sort of the next phase. And so thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you, Leezie. Mario.
I just want to say thank you all for the invitation and opportunity to participate in this. This has been a great conversation and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Any final words from you, Lucy?
I'm thrilled to now know a few more people in Arizona and to know a little bit more about what's going on. If there are activities or efforts or planning conversations or discussions about policy, about data that you're eager to get involved with, I'd love to be part of them. And thank you for having me. It's just a delight. And plus 100 to Sentari's advice on mental health and taking good care of each of us. We've got a lot to take on and got to take care of ourselves first.
That's right. That's right. Lucy, Mario, Leezie, Sentario, thank you so very much for your thought-provoking presentation and dialogue about how we give now. And special thanks to all of you for attending and for adding your questions and for staying with us for 2 hours to talk about this very important topic. For those of you who are interested in learning more about the organizations we discussed today, we encourage you to reach out to ASU Lodestar Center and please join us for our next Philanthropy Matters speaker series presentation in the fall. We have quite a few issues that we're going to bring up. Jackie mentioned in the chat, we'll be looking at trust-based philanthropy and mutual aid collaboratives in future events and podcasts for ASU Lodestar Philanthropy Matters. So stay tuned for that. And we will leave you with this quote from writer Margaret Wheatley. No matter the problem, community is the solution. We can't do this work alone. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great afternoon.